Hey there, everyone. Dave Keller here with Market Misbehavior. Today we're going to highlight 4 stocks demonstrating a good combination of earnings momentum and timing momentum, meaning they're showing the characteristics of strong earnings potential, particularly focus on earnings revisions, but also some other earnings-related data, but also strong price actions. These are some of the stocks that are actually outperforming here over the last 60 days, and potentially these are the ones showing strength despite some market uncertainty. By the way, all along the way, we're going to be using a platform called EPS Momentum. I'll tell you more about that platform a little bit later. So here we're looking at the main EPS Momentum dashboard, and I would tell you if you're just getting started with this, there's this widget called Get Started. I would make good friends with that widget because there's a lot of great content. It is an overwhelming amount of awesome content to help you parse through earnings and price-related data, but also to try to surface good ideas. And that's a really good way of just understanding the different aspects. I want to start with just a quick macro review. So I'm going to go to the Markets widget. And what I found is really cool. You can actually drag these things around and move them wherever you want, which I actually find kind of helpful. All right, so here we're actually looking at the macro widget, or the Markets widget, just to look at the major indexes and some news. But I want to get down to this section called sectors, because there's this really cool visualization where we can look at the 11 S&P economic sectors. Right now it's showing the last 60 days and it's showing price. And here's what I would do. I would immediately switch it to ratio because I think this tells a great amount about the story. We're now looking at the last 60 days across the 11 S&P 500 sectors. How many of these sectors are seeing their relative strength lines appreciate or go higher over the last 2 months? Now, there have been some that have had some random, pretty strong up moves, like energy going into April. But which ones in the month of April are really getting it done? Arguably, only 2. The most obvious one is technology. And I know we've highlighted in our work, if you watch our market recap show, we've been talking, of course, about the AI trade that has become re-energized in April. But it's also the software companies, it's the storage names, it's a bunch of things that are sort of AI, but also tangential to AI in the technology sector. A number of those names doing quite well, and it's enough for the XLK to be a strong performer. The other one is the XLY, the consumer discretionary sector. Now, this sector had not done very well going into the last week or two, but we've really seen an upside surge in names like Amazon that is causing an improvement in relative performance. But if you're looking to just sit back and gain exposure to the broad S&P sectors and outperform, that's obviously not a great place to be. So one of the reasons why we use a platform like EPS Momentum is to try to focus in on a bottom-up process. Here's what the big picture looks like. The S&P for now holding 7,000. Here's what the sectors look like. Not a lot of sectors getting it done on a relative basis. So where do we find opportunities? We look down at the stock level. We try to find names demonstrating some signs of strength. Now, this whole desktop, this what they call the dashboard, is all very customizable. As you can see, you can just kind of click and drag things to move them around. I've actually set up my own, and I would encourage you, obviously, as you spend time with the platform, get used to setting up your own dashboard, because for me, that's where you can really kind of make it your own, right? And I've found that for me, I love to make the chart a central part of my thought process. But I also like to have a simple scanner to find ideas. I love an advanced quote to sort of understanding the relationship between earnings momentum and price momentum. And then I immediately want to transition into the chart. So with that in mind, let me highlight 4 of the names that came up in my use of the scanner earlier today. Now, this is the scanning widget. I'm actually going to switch it to, actually, there's a linked up here, relative strength. That's the one that I want to do. This is basically, if you look here, the relative market rank, or RMR, is the basis of this particular scan. It's looking for the strength of the stock compared to all the other stocks out there, right, with a relatively high market cap. And actually goes down to the mid and small cap space as part of that. And essentially looking at the slope of that relative market rank. So these are the stocks that have improving relative momentum, right, or what we would call timing momentum in my opinion. So which stocks are showing strength, not just on an absolute basis, but on a relative basis. You can see some of the names. Some of these tickers may be familiar with, and we'll start with a fairly familiar one just to kind of orient ourselves to what we're seeing here. So this widget I love to have front and center. I've spent a lot of time with the platform, and I keep coming back to this one because I love this section right here. What this is basically showing you is NVIDIA And then I have the two parts to it. And again, I think the real value of EPS momentum is looking for strong earnings momentum and strong price momentum, what they call trend timing momentum. Here we can see on the left half is the earnings momentum. That's actually a score that they use to compare earnings momentum across different things. And we have the relative strength in terms of earnings and the relative strength in terms of sales. So top line revenues, bottom line earnings, we're looking at all of those things to be fairly constructive. And because they are all pretty constructive, this section, the earnings section, is color-coded green. On the right side, we have all the different models that are used in this platform to measure momentum, to measure volume, to measure performance. So things like the trend is up, the slope of that relative market rank, what we spoke about earlier, is positive. Here's the actual number of the relative market rank. Positive power days, I'll talk about power days in a little bit, but that's looking for volume support on the move. And if enough of these factors are positive, that'll be color-coded green as well. So for me, once I run a scan, I usually flip through the names and I want to make sure that as much as possible, I'm focusing on charts that are showing that 1-2 punch, strong earnings, strong timing. And because I've found is those are often some of the better setups, and certainly the names showing some decent strength. So here's the chart of Nvidia, and we're actually overlaying that earnings momentum score. So here we can see EM is 23.6. That's summarized up to an integer of 24, and that's their last earnings report. So I can see what happened post-earnings, but I can also see that that important score. And as we go back, I can see what the earnings momentum score was during those previous reporting dates. Lower on the chart, because we're going to come back through a number of examples, we can zoom in here a little bit. In green, those are positive power days, or there's an upward move on stronger momentum. The red power days are a negative power day, where we have a big down move in price on stronger volume. So big move in price with more than average volume. That's called a power day. We want to see generally more positive power days. We don't want to see a lot of negative power days, of course, if a stock is in an uptrend. So in the case of Nvidia, we had this big power day out of the low, and I think that was really important. Look down at the score, and this is actually the models: trend, price momentum slope, relative market rank slope, the power days, and also the EMA, the 20 versus 50-day exponential moving average, simple measure of trend. So when all of these are green, that means all of those trend factors are positive, and that's the type of thing that we want to see. That's what makes this color-coded green here. So Nvidia obviously showing a lot of strength on there. The power day that we saw back here at the end of March, I think was an important initiation of this uptrend phase, and now we can see plenty of up days with plenty of upwards volume. So this is the kind of chart that I tend to think of as innocent until proven guilty, right? As long as we still keep making higher highs and higher lows, as long as the volume is supportive, as long as the model reads green across the board, this is a good chart. When something along those lines change, right? When some of these models, one or two of them, start to turn red, maybe I revisit it. When there's a negative power day, which would be a big down day on heavier than average volume, that could indicate larger investors, institutional investors starting to lighten up a little bit or take profits. Maybe that would be a warning sign. But for now, all clear, onward and ever upward, as I like to say. I'll show you three more names that came up on my scan using this. Carvana is one which, while not completely positive at the moment, you can see with the 1-2 punch that we mentioned, earnings overall pretty strong. Timing momentum, not everything, but overall pretty decent. And I think what's important about the example of Carvana, as I was reviewing through the details, number one, we can see at the bottom, this is looking pretty positive across the board, but look at the power days, right? With Nvidia, we had one big power day off of the low. Here we actually have a sequence of them, and that's what I really like to see, right? You like to see the stock moving higher, and you like to see additional accumulation on the way up, right? You have to remember that the best way of measuring sentiment around a stock, I would argue, is price. That's the best arbiter of investor sentiment. So if investors are optimistic, that's going to be generally reflected by the price of the stock going higher. But we can validate that price action by looking for support in the terms of greater volume. So big up moves on higher than average volume. That's what we saw back here at the end of March. That's what we've seen here on April 14th. That's what we've seen again on April 17th. So the uptrend has been continued. The uptrend has been extended because of those power days. So I like the fact that this is actually demonstrating some power days, not just at the beginning of the move, and I love that breakout above short-term resistance with the power day, but I love the additional power days that have come on. You flip that over and you can see the issues that we observed here in January and mostly into February on the same stock on Carvana. Look at this big down day. As it was testing previous all-time highs, we had that big down day on heavy volume. That's a negative power day. Then similar to, the opposite of what we've seen here, we've seen some positive power days kind of reinforcing the uptrend. Here we see some negative power days actually reinforcing the downtrend. We've had a number of sort of stalls in the downtrend, and then the downtrend resumes on heavier volume. So all of that distribution really starts to weigh on the price. We can see that at the bottom, the model sort of negative across the board back at that point as we see so much distribution. That picture has now changed from negative across the board to positive across the board. We've gone from negative power days to positive power days. And by the way, if that particular approach is of interest to you, make sure you remember there's actually a scan for positive day, power day positive breakouts and power day negative breakouts. It's actually a really interesting way to try to surface some of those stocks, maybe just earlier on in their move, starting to show big up moves on stronger than average volume. We're going to continue on in a minute, show you two more stocks, thinking about some of the price and volume relationships. And again, I think all four of these are pretty constructive based on the methodology that we're highlighting here. The tool we're using is called EPS Momentum. You can find more information about their platform at marketmisbehavior.com/EPS. What I love about the platform is that it combines two things that I found to be incredibly valuable when you're trying to identify opportunities in the equity space. Strong earnings, particularly earnings estimates revisions, looking at improving. It's not just the company beats earnings, but it's actually the expectations are being upgraded. That's when stocks are usually rewarded with better price action because those expectations for future earnings are going higher. That's what the EPS momentum ratings are looking for. But we also combine that with timing momentum, looking for stocks showing strong trend characteristics supported by better volume and relative strength. And so, again, you can find more info at marketmisbehavior.com/EPS. Use that link. You'll get 30% off a new account if you want to check it out and get all the benefits all to yourself. All right, two more stocks I want to share with you. And again, these are just ones that I've surfaced, just spending some time with the EPS Momentum tool earlier today. Interactive brokers, the financial sector is an interesting one because a lot of these names actually reported earnings last week, right? And these are the financial sector generally a little earlier on in the earnings calendar. Going into this week. Also, the question is it able to power through this most recent earnings release and show positive characteristics? What is the sentiment? What is the setup going into this week? I would say generally pretty positive. And we can see that, again, based on what we've talked about so far. The green light for EPS momentum, green light for timing momentum. So strong earnings optimism, strong price optimism. That's pretty good. The trend has been positive, and Interactive Brokers actually had a beautiful gap right above that resistance from January into early February. This is a double topping pattern. We saw a lot of distribution with some bearish power days in February as the stock retreated lower. We ended up finding support kind of in this 62 to 633 range, just as we did back there at the in the fourth quarter of last year. From there, look at the positive power days on this acceleration higher, particularly some of these as the trend starts to continue. As we build momentum to break to new highs, we see stronger volume support, and I love that. At this point, we'll see what happens through the course of this week. Stock down today as a number of names pull back. It was down about 2% today, but overall, the trend models are all still fairly constructive. So similar to what we talked about with the chart of Carvana, you want to see building momentum. We're seeing additional price action supporting the uptrend. The more power days, the better on the upside, but overall, I would say a lot to appreciate in terms of that particular chart. Last one I'll share with you is Amphenol, APH. What's interesting about the chart of APH is that the price trend is not super strong just yet. And so I would say this is sort of a mixed bag. Earnings overall, it scores quite well. We can see the earnings momentum readings around 26. That's fairly positive. EPS and sales changes are all pretty constructive here. So it scores very well on the earnings side. It just hasn't had the timing momentum to support the upswing. And I would say one of the biggest takeaways reviewing this chart is the negative power days. And what that language actually means is that the most recent power days have been negative, right? We saw on some of the previous examples, I think it was with Carvana, I want to say, where we had the downtrend with a lot of negative power days. Then we had an uptrend driven by some positive power days. Here we actually don't see that volume support, right? So we see the stock with a similar move to what we've seen with some of the previous examples, but not any real positive power days. So we haven't had big moves in price supported by big influx of volume. So when I'm thinking about how to weigh the sort of the overall mosaic on this chart versus some of the others, maybe this one not as ideal because we haven't had that volume support. All else being equal, I'd much rather have that volume support. But that also means now that we are at or near new highs, can we get some sort of breakout above previous levels? Can we get some of the power days that we've seen on other breakouts, which have often been a great confirmation that this is the beginning of something really special starting to happen in terms of price action? Right now, I would say the stock is testing resistance. So for me, this is one of those where while it scores pretty well and while it's showing some relative strength, we've had a nice run, maybe I wait for that breakout on stronger volume as a way of confirming some of the evidence that we've seen with some of these other charts already showing that magical price and volume combination. There we go. So that's sort of a rundown of the sort of sector picture using EPS Momentum's markets widget, but then also really focusing in on 4 different charts that all came up on a scan for stocks demonstrating some strong relative strength, but also digging into some of the nuances of each of those. And I think when you combine the earnings and price momentum, combining that with some volume support, that's where we're able to start to differentiate. And again, as we said in the beginning of this video, I would say the challenge in this market is that it feels like the major averages arguably feel very overextended. A lot of the sectors are not doing well on a relative basis. So if we go down a level or two and we go down to the individual stock bases, this is where we can find individual names across sectors that are demonstrating improving relative strength. By validating that with earnings, by validating that with some of the other technical factors like volume, maybe we can identify some good stocks with the opportunity to continue to outperform as we go on through Q2. By the way, all of the charts that we've shared and all the analytics, the scans are all part of EPS Momentum. You can find more info about that relatively new platform at marketmisbehavior.com/EPS. Make sure you use that link or use the QR code if you see it on your screen, because that will give you a special deal and give you the opportunity to check it out. That's all for today. My name's Dave Keller with Market Misbehavior. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, it's always a good time to own good charts. Take care, folks.